Morning Year 10. So welcome to Introduction to Computer Systems. This should be a recap on the last topic we did in school, but I thought it'd be useful before we started to look in depth at the registers inside the CPU and what they do. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. What exactly is a computer system? What's it made up of? Okay, so at the centre of everything, we've got our central processing unit. We've got the CPU. And that basically coordinates all the activities. It is closely linked with main memory and secondary storage, and we will talk about each of those components in more detail later in the topic. Main memory is where we store anything we're currently using, and whenever you press save or open, you are coordinating with your secondary storage. Okay? So we've got our main computer system, but we need, as a user, some way of interacting with it so we can get the computer system to do what we want. To tell the computer what to do, we will use some form of input device. That could be the mouse, the keyboard. With voice-activated systems, it could be a microphone. Okay, that information is input into the computer. The processing occurs and it will be displayed as some form of output. Whether that output is on the screen, whether it's through a speaker or the light on your games controller, it will be some form of output. So there we have got a really basic computer system. Obviously at GCSE level, we're now going to delve into breaking that down further. As a side note, it is worth mentioning this term von Neumann architecture. Okay, it is essentially a way of describing the fact that data and instructions are stored in the same memory location. Okay, now that will make more sense as we do the topic, but what I don't want is for you to get a question on von Neumann architecture in the exam and not be able to answer it. So essentially, your data and instructions would be stored in the same memory location if your computer used von Neumann architecture. Okay, so let's drill down a bit. So the FDE cycle, what does the FDE stand for? So it's fetch, decode and execute. Now what that means is the CPU is fetching an instruction from RAM, it is going back, it is decoding it and executing it. As soon as it's done that, it fetches another instruction, takes it back, decodes and executes. Now that is the FDE cycle. This cycle will be happening billions of times per second inside your computer. Every time I'm moving the mouse or if I wanted to insert a new shape or open a new program, the fetch, decode, execute cycle would be occurring between the CPU and RAM to ensure the task was complete. Okay, so what role do each of these play in the FDE cycle? Let's start with the CPU, which stands for Central Processing Unit. Arguably, the most important component in a computer system. Now, you may come to me later in the year and say, actually, I think this is the most important component, and I look forward to those discussions. But as it stands, we will leave it as the CPU. So what do you need to know for the exam? You need to be able to tell the examiner that it processes all the data and instructions. Now, data and instructions are in bold because you have got to put those key terms into your answer. And when we start to look at the registers, we'll look at some examples of data and some examples of what those instructions are. You also need to know that it controls the fetch, decode, execute cycle. Okay, now we look at memory later on in this topic. So all I've included here is what you need to know about RAM in order to understand how the registers inside the CPU work. So RAM stands for random access memory, and it's where anything that you have currently got open. So if we look at my toolbar at the bottom, I've got Chrome, Word, my file manager. All of those things are currently being stored in RAM because they are being used. Okay, it also holds the operating system whilst the computer's on. But again, we will look at those points in more detail later in the topic. So, before we go any further, I would like you to do a quick recap. Can you please get a piece of paper and a pen in front of you if you haven't already? Pause the video and complete this diagram. Once you've completed the diagram, you can then unpause the video, as I will put the answers on the screen now. Okay, so hopefully you identified the input devices allow data to be put into the computer. The computer at a very basic level is made up of the CPU, main memory, and your secondary storage. And that once this processing has occurred, it will be output on some form of output device. Okay, on to the next set of questions. Again, you've got 4 questions here. Pause the video now and answer the questions. Please write your answers down on paper and really consider what you are saying. Once you've completed your answers, unpause the video where the answers will be displayed. Okay, so hopefully you all got that the CPU stands for Central Processing Unit, and its role within the computer is that it processes all of the data and instructions. I hope you all put data and instructions in your answer. And then it controls the fetch, decode, and execute cycle. The CPU does, of course, fetch data and instructions from RAM, which stands for Random Access Memory. And as we talked about at the start of the video, von Neumann architecture is where data and instructions are stored in the same memory location. Now, I've put 2 answers there with that slash in the middle because sometimes in different OCR books or in the exam mark schemes you might see it slightly differently worded. Either of those would get you the marks. Okay. The next video following this one will start to look at the CPU in more detail.